Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. And this week, we want to talk about falling in love with yourself. Falling in love with yourself is a lifelong romance. And the reason why we wanted to talk about the concept of falling in love with yourself is you recently posted a quote from Abraham Maslow. Now, Abraham Maslow is he's the one that came up with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you posted a quote of his that really resonated with me. Like, it had me thinking about it for a while after I read it. And the quote said, "The story of the human race is the story of men and women selling themselves short." The reason why I find that so interesting or intriguing, the story of men and women, selling themselves short, is that I think one of the reasons why I felt motivated to go the personal development route when it comes to maps and models in Myers-Briggs is that I have this like broken record description of, how I got into this. And that is, I grew up in a religion that taught me that everything was going to be handled, right? Like God was going to take care of everything. And for those of you who are, religious or spiritual or still feel that way, or maybe you have, gotten into, transcendence work and understand that a lot of this is projection from within ourselves and our ego. It's not really a matter of, or it kind of feels silly to think that we as human beings could ever like save the world or save ourselves. And I would agree to some extent. By the same token, when we, behave as if this is all reality, right? Like the world that we're engaged in, when we play the game of, this is the world that we live in, and there are real challenges in the world, right? Like there's social injustice, and there's malnutrition, and there are people dying in ways that feel completely preventable. The question I have is why with all of our human potential, why with all of the amazing ability that we have to solve problems and solve challenges and do extraordinary feats of humanity, why don't we? Right? Like, why aren't we solving issues that are very basic at the basement level of Maslow's hierarchy? Like, why do people die of malnutrition? And we can go back and forth about it's a lack of education, or it's leadership, or greedy men and women do greedy things and other people suffer. And I think obviously a lot of those things are going to come into play. However, I've noticed that as individuals, when we have this concept of, what could I do? What could I possibly do as an individual? How could I ever make a change in the world? I think a lot of us have so much potential within us. We have so much ability to do extraordinary things. And one of the reasons why we don't is because we're just really caught up in our own shit.
Yeah.
Like, we're so buried in our own issues. It's so difficult for us to believe that we're okay and that we're not somehow broken or there's something wrong with us, that we end up getting really myopic. Like, we get these, what some have dubbed the reality distortion tunnel, or the reality tunnel, where we just get really just tunnel vision on how we're not worth anything. Like, we're not good enough, or we're not worthwhile. And it removes our ability to understand our true potential as people. So then we end up just kind of following the script that life hands us. Because what else are we going to do, right? Like, we're not special. There's nothing about us that could break out of that script or, do something other than a template, because we're just basic people trying to make a living for our family. When we love somebody, we see their potential fully. We become very optimistic about what they're capable of. And that's why we oftentimes look for people who love us to be our cheerleading squad, because we know that that's what we want to be for other people. And my suspicion is that if we fell massively in love with ourselves, if it was no longer a question about whether or not we're broken individuals, if it was no longer a question about whether or not we were deserving or were worth it, if we just fell head over heels in love with who we are as individuals, individuals, I believe that we would have the ability to understand our full potential. We would be so abundant with love within ourselves that we would be able to, we wouldn't be able to hold ourselves back from wanting to help others, because we would want to spread that love around to other people too. And so what I really wanted to talk about on this particular podcast was this concept of how do we use falling in love with ourselves as not just a personal development tool, but also as a strategy for helping solve the major challenges of the world.
Yeah, I mean, we get so mired in the day-to-day, insecurities, worrying about how bad I've been in a certain situation, or is that person like me? Are they my friend? Do I feel worthy to show up and do this business, or what? Like, we have all these, I think it is that lack of self-love type questions in our lives that we're asking that I think really distracts us from being able to show up and give our best. And I even sometimes think about this in our business, what we're doing in Personality Hacker. Like, oftentimes I think too, we can look to serve others and do things for the world as a way to try to generate that self-love synthetically, rather than really working on loving ourselves. And, you go overseas and maybe you're working on building wells in Africa, or you're doing a Personality Hacker type business trying to do personal development stuff. It's this idea, like, are you covering up the real issue of getting down to the nitty-gritty heart and saying, Joel, I love you, man. Like, you're a person that I'm in love with. I've fallen in love with you. And I'm not saying that is what is happening for us, but that's something that comes up for me sometimes. Like, am I using something, am I using personal growth? Am I using teaching and things of this nature to avoid that difficult, hard work? I would just say it's difficult, hard work, but it's intentional work, I should say, of loving yourself. Because it's not something that we're taught. It's not something that we naturally do. It's not something we're taught. It's not embraced by our culture. In fact, I would argue that if you show up with true self-love, honoring yourself, being modest, like you've defined it before in previous podcasts and other trainings, and really saying, hey, I'm good at this. I love myself for it. Yeah, I've got some areas in this, and I still love myself for those. I am not great on this thing. I might have some darkness in my heart here, but I'm still in love with myself despite all of that, because I love all of me. I think when you show up there, people go, oh, that guy's pretentious. That girl's pretentious. That person's pretentious, or they're trying to show off, or they're, no one, like, it's almost culturally, you're ostracized if you love yourself and show up expressing that outwardly. You know what I mean?
Conceited.
Yeah, conceited, or self-interested, selfish, self-focused, all these words. When I think the argument that we're going to make in this podcast is it will come off potentially looking that way, especially at first as you're getting your training wheels on. But when you go down this road, that's really the path to giving to other people. Because, I mean, how else are you going to show up to the world as a vessel that can be used and can be given to other people and can be valuable if you don't value yourself? How are other people going to value what you bring to the world?
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting point you just made about how sometimes we try to use this idea of, like serving other people as a way to prove our value, right? We want to love ourselves, or we want others to love us to actually,
help us love ourselves, basically.
Yeah,
right?
I would almost even say that it's not to help us love ourselves. It's help us distract ourselves from the fact that we don't have self-love.
That's a good distinction.
Right? Like if other people approve of me, if other people love me, then I don't have, like that will be good enough. And I don't have to think about whether, how I feel about myself. And yet, you mentioned, like, it's not really sustainable to just serve others without loving yourself first. And I think of that metaphor of, in an airplane, if there's any reason for the mask to drop, you put your mask on first before helping anybody else. And that's the instruction we get over and over again. And I feel like in life, we just struggle to put our own mask on. If putting our mask on is, nourishing ourselves, making sure that we're full, making sure that we're in a good, healthy position to help other people, then loving oneself has to be a part of that process. And if we're just struggling with falling in love with ourselves, if we're struggling with how to understand how much value and worth we have as an individual, we're never successfully putting that mask on for ourselves. And then we can't really ever focus on doing it for anybody else, like helping them put their mask on. So I thought that we could bring in what I think might be one of the most helpful models. This is a model you and I both actually grew up with. This is a model that very frequently is focused on in Christian circles. And I think it's just I think it's such a powerful way of seeing how we can get that oxygen mask on ourselves. Such a powerful way of like going, okay, I'm going to nourish the self first, and then I'm going to be able to nourish others. And that model that I want to bring in is that concept, or we want to bring in, is that concept of the 4 Greek definitions of love. Now, I always found it super interesting that other languages have multiple words to create distinctions around this concept of love, because English has like one. It's the word love.
I love hamburgers.
Yeah, exactly.
I love my wife. I love my kids.
Right. I mean, there's other words.
I love traveling.
Yeah, exactly. There's other words similar, like affection or fondness or, like words like that. But when we talk about love, the emotion of love, exactly, traveling, your dog, your wife, and pizza all take the same, they all are the same word. And there's actually other languages that have a lot more distinctions for love than Greek. But this is a model that you and I both grew up with. We have some real familiarity around it. And I think that...
And for context, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to distract you.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I broke your thought.
No.
Just for context, the reason why the Greek language we grew up with is because a lot of the scriptures we grew up with were originally written in Greek. And so that comes from that. If you don't have background specifically in this religious practice, that's why Christianity has a lot of Greek terms, because the original scriptures are Greek scriptures, basically.
Right, and the New Testament.
Yeah, the New Testament. The Hebrew was the Old Testament, obviously.
Right, and some of it was written in Aramaic and other languages, but primarily Greek and Hebrew. And so this concept of, the different words for love that Greek has, I think the reason why it's been kind of co-opted in a positive way, I think, for religious groups is because oftentimes they're applying it to how we should be feeling about others, how we should be feeling about God. It's just a really positive way of looking at how to develop concepts of love for others and for, really gaining appreciation. Really, love is a higher ideal, and I don't think any particular theology or paradigm or meme, belief system has any sort of like monopoly on the concept of love. But I really like how it's presented in those circles, and I especially want to bring that concept into falling in love with yourself. So there's 4 different words for love, and what we're going to do is we're going to go through these 4 descriptions and talk about how they're classically used, and then talk about how we can apply them to ourselves in order to fall madly in love with ourselves.
Yeah, so real quick, just so you can, if you're keeping notes, you can write down the 4 loves. I'll just list them really quick, then we'll unpack them. Storge, Eros, Philia, and Agape. And let's go right into Storge. Storge love is that love that you have for family, for the people that you are genetically connected to. These are people like your children, your parents, your cousins, anybody you have shared genetics with that you really didn't choose in life. This was chosen for you. When you were born, you didn't really choose your siblings. You didn't choose your parents. Now your children, you had somewhat of a choice too.
Well, whether or not to have them, but the ones you get are the ones you get.
But once you have them, you don't have a choice. You can't alter that yet genetically. So this is that idea of love for the people in your life that are genetically tied to you.
And it's really one of the first understandings of love that we have. I think one of the earliest manifestations of love that we have as individuals is that we start loving our families. We fall in love with our parents. We love our mothers and our fathers when we're really young. Really at the point where we understand this concept of theory of mind, which comes on around the age of 4 or 5. And theory of mind is this idea that it's like the first time we recognize that other human beings are other people and they're seeing things differently than we're seeing them. That comes up around the age of 4 and 5. And around that time period when we understand that, these people are separate from us, we start to love them as separate entities other than just, our own self-love. And at the age of a little baby, self-love is really about self-care. Like, it's like, I need to be able to have these, I need to be able to be nourished. I need to be able to be safe. And so most of the demands we make as babies is, make sure that I'm getting my needs met because otherwise I'll die. I'm totally helpless. And so when we get to a point where we recognize that these aren't just like servants surrounding us, but they're actually like whole human beings other than just ourselves, we form an attachment, a bond that's even deeper, and we love them. Now, the reason why I think that this is a really powerful illustration for how we can feel about ourselves, and not just even an illustration, but we're looking at things on a biological level right here. The reason why we have Storge love for our family members is, like you said, we share DNA with them. We share coming from a lineage. And it's, from the very, very first single-celled organism that separated into two cells. We have had an absolute will and drive to survive. Like, we want to live. It is so clear that living organic tissue wants to keep living, right? Like, we just want to live so bad. And as hosts of our genes, right? Like, I'm an individual expression of humanity, but really the thing that really wants to live inside me is the same thing that's wanted to live inside other hosts for a really long time, and that is my genes, my DNA. It's really the thing that wants to live, which is why it drives our biology so strongly to procreate. All we can think about is procreation, right? Like, it is the foundation of us as animals, really. And we love our family members because they share our genetic script with us. And so we can't help but have that bond, because the same thing that drives us to want to live is the thing that drives us to want to hold precious anything that's sharing our DNA with us.
Well, and that's our close genetic script. I mean, we share genetic script with the entire human race. But these are the people that, like, our genetics are so close to them, they almost seem like us to some degree. Like, parts of us feel so close to them because it's such a close copy genetically. Mm-hmm. And I just thought of that, just a real quick reframe for you to think about that idea that if it's at a DNA level of love, if that's where it's rooted, all of humanity shares your same DNA. So
it's totally true.
If you are thinking in love terms, like, we basically are one big human family together genetically.
Yeah.
Now, how does this apply to us as people, for self-love?
Well, and I was thinking about the biological component is what it compels us to love. Like, we are evolutionarily programmed to love our family. And it's such a powerful program that our parents have to be complete and total F-ups before we'll divorce ourselves from them. Like, our family has to treat us very badly before we won't forgive them, hold space for them. I mean, we might not like them. We might not want to hang out with them. But it is, even then, even when they're horrible to us, we still, on some level, miss that relationship. We desire the relationship because it is such a strong program inside of us to love these people who share our biology. Well, nobody is closer to having your DNA script exactly the way that you have it than yourself. So the question is, can you develop Storge love for yourself? And I think that's actually what we have. That thing that keeps us from wanting to commit suicide is, in my opinion, probably closest associated to Storge. So we do love ourselves in the sense that we want to keep living. But can we hold space for ourselves? Can we have patience? Like, even when we mess up, right? Like, even when we do things that might be considered, terrible decisions, and we're totally facing the consequences of our actions. And, even when we're in a position where we totally put ourselves in that situation and we were totally stupid. Just like with your family, where you might go, hey, I know that you've completely screwed yourself over financially, but I'll lend you $500 because I love you. Can we hold that same space for ourselves? Can we go, I know I just effed up. I know I just screwed up. I know that I'm in a situation where I totally did this to myself. And also, I'm going to have patience with myself. I'm going to love myself despite that.
Yeah, so what's coming up for me, if we're talking about the DNA level, I mean, that's really about the survival of our DNA. So that's about health in my mind, which would mean that self-love in the Storge level would be about, not destroying my body, protecting the very essence that's carrying that DNA, eating healthy, exercising, getting rest, not being stressed, Like, just like, you have a child, you don't want them to eat crap because they'll grow up and their brain will be fried from eating tons of sugar. You want to feed them good foods that will help their brain develop and their body develop and be strong and healthy throughout their life. Well, think about yourself the same way. I mean, the DNA is carried in our bodies. It's almost like, you could almost say, I don't know if I want to stretch it this far, but it's almost like body love, like the physicality love of ourselves. Like, don't go binge drink all weekend and expect that to be an expression of love for yourself, because you've just destroyed parts of your DNA. Literally parts of your DNA have been destroyed through that experience. You might have shaved months off your life. So these types of ideas, caretaking your actual physical essence, I believe shows up at this Storge place for yourself. So we're really going to move on to the next love, which is Eros. And you know this word, obviously, if you're listening in. You've heard it used in the word erotic. Eros is the Greek word for sexual or romantic love. And this is different than sexual attraction or lust. We're talking explicitly, excuse me, what word am I searching for here? Explicitly about romantic love or sexual love, not just lust or attraction, because that comes up all over the place. You might be attracted to somebody and not have any love toward them. You might even procreate with them and not have any romantic or erotic or eros love for them. But this is in that romantic partnered relationship or relationships, if that's how you swing. Should I use that word? I don't know. But this is that part of it. And obviously this shows up in a marriage, boyfriend, boyfriend, however your romantic relationships are structured. But it's all about that candles and sweeping you off your feet and all that romantic stuff you think about that are in the novels and movies we read about. It's the love that is in most of our pop culture. Songs, movies, music, poems, like all of this is expressing this Eros love that we all seem to be chasing.
So the question is, how do you develop Eros love for yourself? How do you sweep yourself off your feet and have candlelit romantic love for yourself? How do you have erotic love for yourself? And what's interesting about this is I personally believe, even though, we have a great relationship. I hope that we are together until the day we die. Right? Or I hope we die wrapped around each other, holding each other's hands in an embrace, and 3,000 years from now, an excavation team digs us up and finds our bones. That just sounds amazing to me. And while I hope that is true, I hope that happens, I still believe that I fundamentally am the one person that I'm going to be going through and have gone through every moment of my life with. We might not have that romantic outcome. One of us might die young, or we might end up deciding our relationship is complete and we move on. That will all be okay. And we'll still be with ourselves, right? No matter what romantic relationships we have as individuals throughout our life, we're really the one person that we can't escape, right? We're the one person that we're traveling through life with. And so developing a romance with ourselves, falling in that almost cliched, generic way, falling in love with ourselves and feeling yeah, I am awesome and I'm amazing and I'm sexy, and just feeling really good about who we are as an individual in that way, I think is an expression of Eros love for ourselves.
So this could be anything as tangible as drawing yourself a bath and lighting candles and pampering yourself, taking yourself on a date. Literally, think about romancing yourself. What would that look like to romance somebody else? And just like with Storge love, you said, who else knows your DNA better than you do? So why, you're the one that knows it because it's you. Well, you know exactly how you'd want to be romanced. So to romance yourself would be an amazing experience because you know exactly what you'd want done in a romantic way. Now, this might sound really weird if this is the first time you've heard some of these ideas about loving yourself. And my speculation is it'll feel weird the first time you do this. But romancing yourself, getting past the weirdness that might sound, can be a really powerful experience of expressing love to yourself, of that erotic or romantic love. because that expression is something we all crave. We all crave somebody to take the time to do something very special for us just because. Just because. It's a romantic gesture. Well, why not make romantic gestures for ourselves, right?
Yeah, I actually know somebody who, a friend of a friend, ceremonially married herself. She had gone through a lot of different failed relationships. She didn't really feel like she could find the person that she wanted to be with. And eventually she said, well, maybe I should just accept being with myself, right? Like maybe I should accept. And so she went through the ceremony of marrying herself, which I thought was really an intriguing concept. So, you just this weekend, I was like, I'll watch Piper. You go grab your camera and go out in the woods and just hang out in the woods and be in nature and go take pictures. And I would imagine that was basically a date with yourself. And you've allowed me to do the same thing. It's this idea of going on dates with yourself. It's this idea of pampering yourself and really treating yourself like you would a lover. And I personally believe that it's quite healthy to also have a sexual relationship with yourself. There's lots of studies that indicate that masturbation is actually physically healthy. And one of the ways that I have personally been able to get over some major issues about how I look and my insecurities around my body and whether or not I'm acceptable as a female has been through self-pleasure, has been able to see myself and experience myself as a sexual creature and to be able to actually, fully manifest that.
Well, and there's no pressure in the moment of like making sure you're cool with a partner and they're cool. And it's like, it's just you and yourself fully expressing that Eros experience. And you don't have to like have any distraction. Not that a partner doesn't make it also exciting, but you're just totally immersed in your experience in the moment.
Yeah. And obviously, if that's all you're thinking about, if you can't get off other than masturbation, or if that's like the most satisfying sexual relationship you're going to have, you probably don't want to go too far down that road.
I'm sure somebody's listening going, I wish this is all the love I get. I wish I had an actual romantic partner to have a sexual relationship with.
Yeah, definitely. And you want to be able to express yourself sexually with other people as well. I mean, there's a lot of people who deal with things like porn addiction, and I wouldn't actually call that erotic love. I wouldn't call that Eros love. I wouldn't call that self-love. I would call that, addictions to a specific sensation that you're chasing. And I don't know if I'd really put that in the same category as like authentic, true expression of self-love. That said, and even if, you don't have to be comfortable with that. That doesn't have to be your cup of tea. However, there is something to be said for experiencing yourself as a beautiful, sexual, sensual creature. And it's been the pathway to a lot of people's, health and development. There's entire studies around it. There's entire disciplines around utilizing masturbation and eroticism for, it's for deep healing work. So this whole concept of Eros love, of falling in love with yourself, feeling romantic about who you are, pampering yourself, feeling, open and available to express yourself sexually through self-pleasure. All of this is, I believe, a very healthy way to even begin the discipline of falling in love with yourself.
Absolutely. So those are some ideas on Eros love. The next type of love is called Philia. Philia. You've heard this if you are from the United States. You've heard the base root of this word in the city of Philadelphia. And the city of Philadelphia means brotherly love. Philia means that friendship or brotherly love for a fellow human. And it's expressed in the friends we choose, the acquaintances we have, the people we decide to, spend time with, spend time around laughing and having fun with or experiencing life with. They're not necessarily our romantic partners or lovers. They're not necessarily our family, but these are the people that are outside of those two parties that we spend time around. And that is that Philia love. And how this would look for yourself, if you're thinking about, okay, how can I love myself? Well, it's friendship love. It's brotherly love. It's thinking of yourself as your friend, your best friend. You are the only person, again, like Antonia said, going through life the whole way with yourself. So why not be your own friend throughout that experience? That just seems, it seems like a good idea in loving ourselves to say, yeah, I'm going to, how do you treat a friend? Do you bludgeon them every time they mess up? Do you cut them some slack? Are you, do you look for the good in them? Are you trying to build them up and support them? Do you help them move when they're moving houses? Like, they're down and out. What do you do for them? And what would you do for yourself in the same situation if you're your own best friend?
There's a study done that we're looking for what the indicators of what creates a successful relationship. And this was in like romantic relationships, and then it also played out in platonic relationships, friendship relationships. And they realized that it wasn't personality type. It wasn't any of the things that a lot of us assume would be, like an indicator. It was actually in shared interests and values. The more shared interests and values we have with another person, the more likely we are to have a long-lasting relationship with them. Well, just like you said, nobody else shares your exact DNA, and nobody else knows exactly what you would like to experience in order to be pampered fully. Nobody else has your exact set of shared interests and values other than yourself. Like, you are ideally suited to be your own life partner. You are so perfectly matched to yourself. It's ridiculous. So this idea of, we were talking about Storge and how it's the love you have for those who share your biology. And we are evolutionarily programmed to want to love people who share our biology. And we're also, to some extent, through evolutionary psychology, programmed to want to, share a life with somebody, have a life partner. There's lots of advantages to having a life partner. So Eros love very obviously evolved over time because it's so advantageous to at least have, pair bonding partners for a certain time. I think the average is like 7 years is, we are serially monogamous for 7-year chunks, and we can go beyond that if we choose to. But there's a lot of advantage to having those monogamous chunks of time with each other. So it makes sense that we would have evolved erotic love. And then with Philia love, it also makes sense that we would want to have a tribe feel, right? Like the people who are part of our tribe, the people we get to choose. There's a lot of advantage to having cheerleading section and people who will be there when we get down on ourselves. So, and vice versa. So it really makes sense that we would evolve all of this. And it makes sense that we would need to have a feeling of all of these senses of love, regardless of our context. So if we bring these senses of love to ourselves, then we aren't relying on the outside world. Like, it won't be context dependent. We won't be required to have other people, showing us this love. And that way, if for some reason we feel isolated, and sometimes we can feel isolated just purely based on logistics, we will still be able to nurture ourselves and experience these forms of love because we've created this discipline within ourselves. Like, we carry the love wherever we go. We're not waiting for other people to bring it to us.
Yeah. So the final type of love that we're going to talk about is called agape love. And this is a love that is unconditional. It's a principled love. And it is, like I said, it's unconditional. It's based on loving other people and yourself, because that's what we're talking about today, but loving other people just because they're people. And that's all they have to be to have this kind of love. It doesn't mean necessarily putting up with abuse or any kind of bad behavior or anything like this. You can still have boundaries. It's just that deep sense that you are a human. I recognize you're a human. And because you're a human, you're a living being that's very similar to me, I'm going to just love you on principle, just because. And obviously this can extend to other animals and even the natural world, trees and other creatures. But obviously we're talking in the context of people and loving ourselves. And this is one that I think this is one that also we struggle with as humans to apply to ourselves, because we're like, well, we might have a sense of principled love for others, and yet you may not have it for yourself. And and the thing is, we see so many of our own flaws. We see so many of the things. It's like, well, I'm unlovable. I can't even love myself because of all this crap that I pull up in my life, the darkness of my heart, or whatever you can see in yourself. And so it's tough to bring that principled love sometimes into frame. But this is really, really a powerful form of, it's basically positional. It's just, it cannot be altered. It is unconditional, it's positional, and it's principled.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have called it the God form or God love because it is so principled. It's like a higher form of love. It's not based in biology. It's not based in like as we've been talking, you can see the evolutionary progression of the previous three styles of love. You can see why we would love people who share our biology, because our genes are just dying to continue living in the next variation, and we're just part of this legacy. You can see why we would have evolved Eros love or erotic love, because there's so many advantages to having a relationship. And you can see why we would evolve, a Philia love. You could see why we would want to have, relationships with people that we feel really tight with and that would support us in dark times. But agape is such a fascinating form of love because there's no real noticeable biological advantage to it, except that it gives us a general sense of well-being. Principled love is what compels us to want to help others that we don't even know, like the concept of the Good Samaritan, or loving strangers, loving the unlovable. Really, it's loving people simply, like you said, because they exist, and because it's not just so obviously biologically rooted. It's a discipline, right? It's not emotional. It is emotional in that it strikes us emotionally, like all feelings. All love is rooted in feelings. It all gives us good feelings. Love is a binding agent, and it just makes us feel so good. So we do get rewards in that we get the reward of feeling positive and feeling the feeling of love, which is mostly pleasant. Most of the time it's a pleasant feeling. But principled love is one that we could easily live without for a really long time and be perfectly fine as individuals. But as a species, right? As people who don't want to destroy each other and ourselves, as people who don't want to destroy the earth or destroy animals or cause suffering. This is where agape comes. Because when we have principled love, the idea of harming others causes indignation in us. It offends our principle of love. So it actually starts out conceptual and ends up emotional, as opposed to the other way. It's not something that just is experienced emotionally and then we rationalize it. We understand the concept first and then we implant it within our hearts. So when we're talking about falling in love with ourselves, you hit the nail on the head when you said, even when I feel unlovable, even when I feel like I've gone too far, even when I feel like all I can see are my mistakes and how I'm a terrible human being and I can't do anything positive or good, agape principled love will allow you to love yourself. It will allow you to hold space because it is based on principle, not on any specific thing you did that's of value, not on any specific action you took or way of thinking or whatever, right? You love yourself because you are you, because you are human and you're here and you exist. And just by showing up as living organic tissue that is conscious and aware, you have value.
Yeah. So as we're talking about this idea of loving ourselves, I remember my cousin who I grew up with, who's just, I think he was like 2 years older than me, passed away, I think 4 or 5 years ago from cancer. And I wasn't able to be there at the time that he had passed away. I was actually out of state. But my dad and my mom were in the hospital with my uncle and aunt when he was in the last moments of his life. And they actually got to basically say goodbye to him and walk out of the room. And then his wife was in there with him at the very last moments of his life. But my dad said something very interesting, because my dad was with my aunt and uncle like 33 years before that when my cousin was born. And I remember my dad telling me the story, saying it was such an interesting and surreal experience to be at the beginning of someone's life and watch them grow up, and then be at the end of their life and watch them die. And I remember thinking, wow, that is a unique experience, because most of us in life are born around people that we will not die around. Like usually if we don't have an accident or we're not sick young and we live a full life, an entire life, we're born with our parents and maybe a few siblings around us. And often those people are not around at the end of our lives. Now our siblings might be. They might be the only people in the world. If we live a full long life, obviously our parents will pass away before us and our siblings might be around at the end of our life. but they might not. And the likelihood of that happening there is a chance, but it's not guaranteed. And so I had this thought when he told me this just not even a thought. It was just this gut feeling that I truly am alone, not in a despondent way, but I truly am alone in this life because I won't have the same people the whole way through. The only person, like you said earlier, that will be with me the entire time is me. Like, even if my brother makes it to the end of my life with me and he's near me when I'm going my deathbed, he had some of that experience, but we've spent lots of time apart. We haven't literally lived together every day. We've lived apart. We've done our own lives. We have our own families. We have our own stuff going on. And so we don't have all of the intimate sharing. We have some of it, but not all of it. I am the only person that has all of my experiences. I'm the only person that I'll have at the end of my life that I had at the beginning of my life. And so just take a moment to think about that. Think about the end of your life. When you look back, the person that has been there with you the whole time has been you. And the person that's been there with you the whole time, how have they treated you? How have they loved you? How have they shown you love? And how would you have liked them to show you love? And then you can say, okay, well, I can start that right now. I don't have to wait to the end of my life and look back and have any regrets. I can start to say, how can I begin to show this person that I'm with, this whole experience, this whole journey I'm on, how can I start showing them love in these 4 different ways? The Storge way, which is that family, DNA, body love, or the Eros, the romantic, or the Philia, the friendship, buddy love, brotherly love, or the Agape, principled, unconditional love. How are you showing yourself those things?
Yeah, you are your life partner. Yeah, it's really powerful. And then to go back to, just sort of wrap this up, to go back to the beginning, can you show yourself such extraordinary love that you are abundant with it, and now you can't help but have it bleed over into everybody else? And you can put your oxygen mask on, and even if it falls off, you have a discipline where you can grab it and put it back on real quick. And you can help other people put their oxygen masks on, right? Like, you can now no longer be myopic. You can be full and nourished and able to reallocate those energies to helping solve some of the major life challenges.
Yeah, and it's not just solving challenges like in a tangible, like I got to go build wells in Africa, or I've got to start a company that's going to be personal development focused. You told me a story, Antonia, about, and I've run into maybe 1 or 2 people like this in my life. I just can't remember them, but it's such a visceral experience. I should be able to remember it. But you told me a story about this guy who you ran into when you were living in Portland, in your neighborhood.
Yeah.
Who I don't think he was actively involved in any kind of social cause, but he just exuded love, joy, and happiness every time you ran into him. And your whole day was just reframed. This guy probably had this idea of just intense self.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I don't know if I'm telling the anecdote correctly, but
no, he lived at the end of my block, and I've never met a happier human being. He was just effusively happy, and his happiness was massively contagious. Just being in his presence made me think everything was going to be okay.
And I'm guessing, and I don't know this to be true, and you don't either, but I'm guessing that he probably had a very high level of self-love for himself. And I think that's the kind of thing we're talking about. It's like you don't necessarily just get up and you rush off to do something tangible socially or something. It could just be showing up in the world, and now your family is just like, man, what do you have? There's something about you that's infectious, and they can just feel the self-love coming off of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of your disciplines? How do you make sure that you aren't just holding space for yourself and your issues, but that you are actively learning to fall in love with yourself, that you are actively keeping that self-love going, even in tough times, even when you might be super self-critical or you might not feel really good about yourself? How do you make sure that you have, created disciplines around getting back to the space where you truly are experiencing love for yourself?
We want to hear from you. This is our discussion starter podcast. We want to hear some feedback from you. You can find us over at personalityhacker.com. You can leave a comment under this podcast or a question under this podcast. If it's a formal question, we have another format for that. But anyway, comments and questions under there about this topic specifically. And also a growing community of like minds just like you over at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK.
Can I just give a little bit of appreciation for you right now?
Sure.
I'm sure nobody noticed because you play it off so beautifully, but you're really sick right now.
I feel pretty bad.
Oh, and you're getting sicker as the podcast goes on, I can tell. You don't feel good, man.
I think I've got a really bad sinus headache and infection. So
Yeah. We're gonna make sure you get some self-care after this podcast. But I want to thank you for muscling through.
Sure, thank you for thanking me, I guess.
You did you mention that you can rate us on iTunes?
No, I did not.
Because that's my job, right?
Yeah, okay. I guess it's your job. My brain's getting foggier because my head does hurt.
Well, I just wanted to remind people that you can rate us on iTunes. So please feel free to go to iTunes, let us know what you think, rate us, leave a review because the reviews are delightful to read. And just be part of the community and let us know if there is a podcast subject that you'd like us to tackle. Yeah,
absolutely. We will be able to talk with you again on the next podcast episode. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Thanks for being with us this week on Personality Hackers Podcast.